Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We're here to do an annual episode we do called Overlooked Storylines. You know, during the course of the season, we focus on as much as we can, but there's always stuff happening that just doesn't catch our attention as much as maybe it should have. And so we go back at this time of year and take a look at some of those things around the SEC, one storyline for each of the 16 teams. So we will do that here shortly. Before anything else, I also want to we'll do the ad read here in a second as well, but also want to wish everybody a happy 4th of July. We're recording this before the holiday. You're probably hearing this after the holiday. Hope everyone has all of their fingers and toes intact after doing fireworks. That obviously is a little bit of a risk there. Also, like I mentioned, the ad read, we are brought to you once again by Academy Sports and Outdoors. The sun's out and the fun is on at Academy Sports and Outdoors. Score a cool pool, savor summer flavor with the grill, prep for fishing weekends, or mount up with a new mountain bike. However you have fun, you can't lose with our top brands. Gear up online at academy.com or at your local store. All right, Mark. Happy 4th of July to you and your family as well. Sounds like you guys have some fun plans. I think we have similar plans, by the way. I am also going to be hanging out poolside. I'm actually moving buildings here in Raleigh, and I'm saying goodbye to a building with a pool and saying hello to one that is better in a lot of ways, but does not have a pool. And that's kind of the one thing I think I'm going to miss. And so tomorrow is not only the 4th of July, but it is my official goodbye to having a pool at my disposal.
Well, I have a love-hate relationship with our pool. We bought this house and it had a pool, already in it. And that was a draw, especially for for teenagers and the wife. And they really enjoy having a pool that they don't have to take care of. For those of us who have to do getting the chemicals right and scraping the leaves out, and right now I'm fighting with a leak in the filter. I've tried a few different things, and I'm gonna have to holler uncle and get somebody to help me to come out here and figure out why. I'm fairly handy, but I cannot get this. Got a little pinprick, spurt, and anyway. So that's the thing they don't tell you about with the whole pool deal is, you're gonna, especially if you're the primary maintenance person for it, you're gonna be spending as much time doing that as you are enjoying it, and everyone else is just awesome. Well, not so much for you, but I digress. It'll be a good day.
If you are listening and have any tips for Mark on his filter leak in his pool, you could reach out to him on social media to help him out there. We did, by the way, Mark, we did get someone did. We put out a call for, hey, are you an umpire or some sort of umpire insider? We did get a little information on that. So maybe we'll have another discussion about that at some point moving forward. Real quick though, what is your skill level from 1 to 10 with a pool skimmer? Is that how you get the leaves out? Do you like one of those,
with the net? Yeah. Oh, I'm expert level at this point. I'm at least a 9.5. I'm sure I can improve a little bit. I'm really good because it's got the extending pole on it, so you can go up and down with it, and I've kind of got it where I can turn it to go into the deep end without really some muscle memory at this point.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm pretty good at it, and I get a lot of practice.
It's like
reps. Yeah, I'm in the cage a lot.
Yeah. I imagine it's like watching Michelangelo paint, watching you with that pool skimmer.
And we have one of those. Yeah, we have one of those, pool robot things that swims down and vacuums it out and all that. But you can only run it so often. It needs to charge and all that kind of stuff. And you walk out there 10 minutes after you've done it, and there's more leaves, especially in the fall. There's more leaves falling into the pool, or bugs or whatever's floating on the top. It's just constant.
It reminds me of one thing I heard when my parents first moved. My parents retired to a lake house, and one of the things that you heard a lot when they were getting ready to move up there is that you don't actually want to own the boat. You want to know someone who owns.
You want a friend with a boat. Yeah,
that's right. So absolutely. I feel like a pool would be kind of similar.
Yeah.
Or you want a neighbor with a pool.
Yeah,
you
that'd be
able
great.
to just walk over there and then leave it at the end.
Hey, we'll bring the steaks and the beer or the soft drinks, whatever you want. But you can take care of the pool.
That's right.
That's a good
That's right.
good
Seems
deal.
like a fair trade. All right, Mark. Let's get into some overlooked storylines. Like I said, we just inevitably there are things that don't catch our attention like they should during the
Yeah.
course of the season. I think especially for the teams that just frankly become less relevant as the season goes on, so we're not as hyper focused on them. So this is a
Hmm.
good opportunity to kind of take a step back and talk about some of those. So as just a point of order, we organize the teams based on the old divisions. So Mark is handling the formerly the SEC West plus Texas. I've got the
Hmm.
SEC East plus Oklahoma, and that's how we're going to organize this thing. Mark, why don't you go ahead and bat leadoff for us? And by the way,
Okay.
I don't know that we have any for those listening. Mine are in the order of the way those teams finished in the 2025 standings. Mark might organize them differently. So it's just going to kind of be a little bit of a grab bag here, but we're going to ping
Yeah.
pong back and forth and go ahead and hit lead off, Mark.
Yeah. Well, we can start at the top of the standings with Texas. The first year in the SEC, and they win the regular season. I mean, that's the obvious storyline going into it. Jim Schlossnagle's first year coming over from Texas A&M to Texas, another huge storyline. Dylan Volantis, one of the best freshmen in the country, just a great bullpen guy. Those are not overlooked. Those are the ones that everyone comes to mind. I think one for me that's overlooked is the job Luke Harrison did
Yeah.
uh, in the rotation all year. Ends up at the end of the year being their best pitcher. After some guys are injured, and ended up being he ended up 5-1 with an ERA around 3. If you'd have
Yeah.
told me that before the season, I would have said, "Whoa, you'll take that right away," because you don't expect it, especially starting 15 games like he did. Um, and he's a guy who could come back because he's not a real big pro prospect. He could get drafted, but it's I would anticipate it being lower, and so you could see him again, and boy, wouldn't that be big for Texas, who is they are reloading the roster in year 2 under that staff. I think will be better than the one that just won the SEC. They may not win as many games. It's hard to do. You see what the schedule looks like, but they're going to be at least as talented, if not more talented, this year. And he's a big part of that, assuming he comes back.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I mean, a guy that there's so much value just in the fact that he took the ball every weekend.
Yeah.
He started 15 games. And even if your ERA is 5, like there's
Hmm.
value in that. But his ERA was 2 runs lower than that.
Right.
So, you really got both ends of that. But just somebody who you could just throw out there every weekend and say, go get them. And then you look
Yeah.
up in the 6th inning and you see where you're at.
Hmm.
Yeah, a lot of value in that. That's a great call. Mine is actually kind of related, although a little bit different. So I'm going to go Vanderbilt because remember Vanderbilt finished pretty high in the standings and number
Hmm.
1 overall
Yeah.
seed. That feels like
Great year.
several years ago. But JD Thompson, there's a difference
Hmm.
between a guy who happens to start on Fridays and a guy who's a Friday guy. Like that,
Yeah.
that might sound like semantics, but there's a real difference there
Yeah.
in college
I understand.
baseball. And JD Thompson became a capital FG Friday guy
Right.
with his performance, and not, through 90 innings, which again, like you want length from your Friday guy. 4 ERA, perfectly solid, 122 strikeouts on the year. I mean, yes,
Hmm.
he's not the prospect of pick your Vanderbilt ace of previous iterations, but he's pretty doggone close in a lot of ways, and it felt
Right.
like that maybe we spend a lot of time, I think, looking at, oh, look how cool this Connor Fennell thing is,
Yeah.
and
And it
he's
was.
such out of nowhere. And it was. I
Yeah.
thought about talking about him, but I was like, you know what? There was a 2 or 3 period where we talked about him a lot. So
Yeah.
like it feels like we really did actually probably talk the right amount about Connor Fennell. But
Yeah.
JD Thompson was, yes, there are a handful of guys that were just flat out better than him in the league. But the list is shorter than I think most people would assume based on
Yeah.
his numbers, and he's going to hear his name called pretty early this month too.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy you felt good with him on the mound, regardless of who you were facing, what the lineup looked like, who the other pitcher on the mound. He gave Vanderbilt a chance to win every week out. And that's really all you can ask, especially if you're rolling out on Friday night, game 1,
Right.
and you feel we like our guy here. So yeah, I'm with you. That's a great call.
All right. What do you got next, Mark?
Let's stay in the Lone Star State and let's go to A&M. You know the obvious storyline, preseason number 1, and then you don't make a regional. All the injuries that they went through, including, Jason Laviolette in Hoover, who gets hit on the hand, has surgery that night, and comes out and plays the next day. I mean, tip of the cap, man. That was awesome. I really feel like those were the primary storylines. The overlooked one for me is Miles Patton. Again, started all 15 weekends. He had 15 opportunities to start. He started 15. Um, that as a Sunday guy. Granted, that they Texas A&M had Lampkin, they had Prager, and they all started all 15 games all year. Which you would think, wow, they must have had a great year with that much consistency in the starting rotation. It just didn't really turn out that way, and it really wasn't their fault. I mean, they were certainly, each of them had ups and downs, but I really like how Patton, he consistently gave them a chance every Sunday, and that's, heading into the year, you knew about Prager, you knew about Lampkin, you didn't know who was going to be the Sunday guy, and then this guy gets it, takes it, and doesn't let go, and I love that uh, about him giving his team a chance when they had all this craziness, with Michael earlier in his first year, and then you didn't know if he was going to return, and he's coming back, and it's just how all that shook out. There was uh, having that solid rotation that you really didn't have to worry about. That lack of volatility, I think, was huge for them to accomplish as much as they did, which certainly was a huge disappointment. But it could have gotten a lot worse, and it looked like it was going to be for a while. But before they kind of did some good things down the stretch.
I'm glad you brought this up. Well, on a couple things, it's funny that I said, even if the guy has a 5 ERA, starting every weekend is a big deal. Well, Miles Patton
Yeah,
is exactly
yeah,
that guy. I
yeah.
promise we're not playing that.
No, we didn't.
But yeah, it's so fast. I'm glad you brought this up because, like, if you'd have showed me those three stat lines for their starting pitchers, and
Right.
I would,
Minus the win-loss record.
right, exactly, yeah, exactly. I would have probably nitpicked and been like, okay, I guess Prager wasn't as good as we
Mm-hmm.
thought he'd be, but Lampkin is probably better, and
Yeah.
Patton was certainly better than I think expectations were. I would have been like, okay, they're pretty good shape, and it's just a reminder that like it's amazing the
Margins.
season played out the way it did
Mm-hmm.
because I think you could even do something similar with the lineup when you look at their stats. Like again, you would notice that Grahovic didn't play much, and so you'd
Yeah.
be like, okay, he must have been hurt, but otherwise at least from a power physicality perspective, like looks like a decent lineup, and it just didn't add up to anything this year. That's where it's just such a bizarre season.
Yeah, they feel, just a little bit short a lot of times. And
Right.
as a
Right.
result, obviously, we don't have to
Yeah.
revisit it.
I'm moving now to Georgia. Talk about teams that,
Hmm.
in a different way, a little bit of a disappointing season, at least in terms of how it finished for Georgia.
Hmm.
A team that just ultimately it just didn't quite come together. Duke once again, like Duke has become a little bit of a boogeyman in the
Yeah.
Athens regional. Duke won that regional back in I believe it was 2018,
Yeah.
and went through there. That's a coincidence, but still, it's interesting. But another great regular season. And my overlooked thing is that Slade Alford really became a pretty complete offensive player. Now he
Hmm.
still has limitations. He's not a great defender, and at the next level, which he'll get an opportunity just because he's such a good bat. We'll see where somebody puts him.
Yeah.
But that's going to be interesting to watch. There's limitations there, but offensively, it was a 1089 OPS this year. He batted 331. It
And
was
you take
16
that.
doubles. It was
Hmm.
19 home runs. And it was pretty good numbers in the SEC too. It's not like that was just beating up on bad pitching. And the strikeout
Right.
rate was way down. The walk rate was way up. It was just a really nice year. And you look at Georgia's offense, and the whole, and it's easy to, we spent a lot of time looking at Zaborowski and Robbie Burnett, but really, I mean, Slade Alford year over year, like maybe he was actually in a lot of ways their best guy, just with
Hmm.
how consistent he was and held down the middle of the order. Reminds me a little bit of how last 2 years seasons ago, I guess. Obviously, Charlie Condon took a lot of the headlines, but Corey
Yeah.
Collins might actually have just been
He
as
was.
or more
Yeah.
important
Had a great
because
year.
he was batting leadoff and setting the tone and all that, and maybe Alford's a similar deal for their lineup where he was actually the most important piece when you really dig down on it.
And the thing I'd like to point out about him, and that's a good call, by the way, is that I guess the 2024 season, he was pretty much a liability defensively. And he went to work in the offseason, changed his body, lost a bunch of weight, and looked like a different cat this year. And it showed up defensively. He certainly wasn't, he wasn't a Gold Glover, but he wasn't a
Right.
liability either. He improved a lot. And as he moves on to pro ball, you continue that mindset of, hey, you're putting in the time, you're putting in the work on whatever it is you want to improve on. And that's the kind of stuff that lets you elevate quickly. And I love that message, for all of us out there that we're struggling with whatever it is, and you really dedicate yourself, and then you see the results from it, and it just reinforces. Sometimes hard work does pay off, and
Yeah.
it certainly did for him.
Yeah. No doubt. All right, Mark, next up.
Yeah, let's go with Arkansas. So the obvious things, the offense was so much better this year. It was one of the best in the country. You can make a case it was the best. The Lloyd brothers took the country by storm. I really enjoyed just how they exploded, um, just and really captured the nation. And they won at home in the postseason. That was another big thing. That was a big storyline for Arkansas. It's kind of get that that scar tissue has been. I think they removed it. So then the I guess the under the radar story, Cam Kojal. When he transferred from Vanderbilt, I thought he would be a nice piece, a complimentary piece. I did not expect him to have the year that he did. He at the plate hit 18 doubles, 15 homers, drove in 62 runs, and he also gave them defensive versatility. He filled in at first base for a while when they really had that void at first and wasn't sure who to play. And he's a middle infielder, and he ended up over there and doesn't have the traditional first base body. He's not 8 foot tall. So that was that was great for him. And then they get the injury to Souza, and he moves to second base, and because that's what was best for the team, and he played well there. And I feel like having that guy one who just exceeds expectations. He was good at Vanderbilt at times. I remember him hitting 3-hole opening day as a freshman, true freshman, right? Who does that? So you knew the talent was there, but you didn't. But that didn't continue all year, and you wondered how that would move because there was a lot of competition for at bats. In that Arkansas lineup, they had some dudes. So for him to be able to come through, I feel like that was kind of a story that maybe didn't get the press that it could have.
That's a good one, and he's continued to the defensive versatility piece. I've been at Team USA stuff the last few
Yeah.
days, and they've played him at second, they played him at third, they played him in center field, which I don't think
Wow.
center field is probably where he ends up. I
Hmm.
mean, but it does go to show that when he gets back to Arkansas, that they're going to be able to. It just makes it easier to build a lineup out
Yeah.
because you don't have to say, well, we can't take another second baseman because
Hmm.
we've got a guy there. Like in this
And
case, you can
yeah,
you can move the
you
pieces
try to get
around.
your best nine. Yeah, you get your best nine, not necessarily the guys that are best at each position. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to talk Tennessee next. And
Hmm.
for me, it's the whole story of Hunter Inslee's development in that program. And I
Hmm.
think it's a great example of, you mentioned Slade Alford just getting better. I think Hunter Inslee's kind of the same thing, but also his story in particular, I think, is a good example of how there's these windows of opportunity you have as a player. And sometimes you miss that window and you never know that that window might not open up again.
Yeah.
And history is littered and we'll never know because we don't have the counter examples, but
Yeah.
there are probably players that would have been great college baseball players that for whatever reason missed a window and never got that opportunity and will never reach their potential. Well,
Right.
I say that because Hunter Inslee 3 years ago now uh, started getting reps in center field largely because Tennessee didn't have anybody else. They had
Hmm.
tried a bunch of other guys. Kavares Tears before Kavares Tears broke out was one of those guys, and they were
Right.
just cycling through guys, and eventually they put Hunter Inslee out there, even though he was thought of as a little bit of a lesser offensive player, and he's not that athletic, frankly.
Hmm.
But he played hard, and he just had a lot of the intangible stuff, and they said, all right, well, at least we know what we're going to get from him. So they put him out there, and he had a nice year. Then he gets better, and then gets better again to where this year he was a heck of an offensive player. Like he was
Yeah.
far from a liability. He was actually a huge asset offensively, and I think furthermore, I think Tennessee is going to need more Hunter Inslee types moving forward. Because it felt like he was the heartbeat of that team. And I think when you look at this roster, the one that just finished playing versus certainly last year's and even the year before, is that this roster lacked guys like Hunter Inslee that had that institutional knowledge over multiple years. Some of Reese Chapman's been there a while, and there were examples, but for the most part, it was a roster that didn't have the history of the Christian Moore and the Blake Burke and that whole group that played on the national title team. So you can't really engineer that. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
Like you can't just microwave that through the portal, obviously. So it's going to have to take some patience and time. But having more guys like that in the program, I think, is the ticket moving forward for Tennessee.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from there. I do feel like Tennessee has the leadership from the dugout. Getting those player-led teams, that's going to be a focus. And he was really, really good in that role. It seemed like it seemed like he was in the middle of every rally. He was the clutch guy who came up and either made the big defensive play or you remember in Omaha a couple of years ago, or the scored the winning run, or was the key base runner, whatever you want to call. And I feel like that's something that we often overlook because we're looking at these tooled up guys, and rightfully so, who had the huge big league future. And you don't, if you don't have the glue guys that keep everybody loose or to keep everybody focused or whatever it is that's lacking at a given time, you're going to struggle to win. It's a long season. There's pressure, and everybody's not going to be at their best every day. And to keep guys focused in the right direction, you need those player-led moments to galvanize people together, and that's something. He was certainly great at that, and that's kind of his legacy. As he leaves Knoxville and moves on to life.
Yeah. All right, Mark. Next up for you.
Let's go Ole Miss. This was a big year for Mike Bianco. It had certainly a lot of heat. It had some years that they'd like to forget. Changed or brought in a pitching coach, and as a result, he pushed the right buttons. All of that seemed to go well. They brought in several guys from the portal that really helped them, and went from one of the worst teams, from the worst team to a team that just missed the postseason to a team that hosted. And that's obviously the huge storyline. That and getting Hunter Elliott back after really missing 2 seasons, and he was able to return. I think the undertold story is Austin Foley, player transfer from Kentucky. Really, I thought he was going to be the backup to Campbell Smithwick, and Foley just came in and just kept hitting bombs, man. I mean, we were probably, I don't know, 6 weeks into the year, and he had like 10 hits and 9 of them were homers. I mean, it was kind of that kind of thing. I don't remember exactly, but it was something like that. And then he ends up with 21 home runs. Did you know he had 21 home runs? That's a lot of home runs, dude. And
it hit me in Hoover when he hit one in Hoover, and it was like that was his 20th home run of the year.
Yeah,
it's like, right. Are you serious?
Yeah, drove in over 50. I mean, just a guy who was fine behind the plate. I mean, just someone that you didn't expect to get this level of contribution from. When he comes in, you don't expect he's a bench piece, right? He's a part-time starter, with an opportunity. Boy, did he make the most of that opportunity. So, and he should be back again this year for an Ole Miss team that will look a lot different because it was an older club, and now he's got another opportunity to be one of the top guys in the middle of that lineup.
Yeah, and again, another window opening that he took advantage of, because I think ask Ole Miss, certainly if you had injected them a truth serum before asking, like, what is your ideal situation to catcher? I do think it would have been Campbell Smithwick catches every day and develops
Yeah,
into a frontline catcher. And
right.
uh, but it turned out maybe being even better than that. Because also, by the way, like Smithwick got, it still wasn't his full potential. There's still a ways to go there, but he was better and was showing improvement. And I think maybe not being thrust into being the starting catcher every day was maybe good for him
Hmm.
to take it a little bit slower. So maybe it'll be a positive all around when it's all said and done.
Yeah.
On Florida, really good year for. I mean, obviously the big thing with Florida is like they just got so decimated with injuries that by the end of it, it was like,
Hmm.
yes, it was a little bit of a surprise once they got into the regional that they just didn't go well. But it was not a surprise that it ended there, just because it felt like at some point it was just too much, and that proved to be the case. And so, um, Bobby Boser, I think, is the overlooked guy for me.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's
That's
a
what I would have said too. Yeah.
1050 OPS, 18 home runs, 19 stolen bases. So he gives you that power, speed. And when he
Hmm.
was at South Florida, it seemed like you look at his baseball reference page for his stats at USF, and it's like he would kind of do one or the other. He had years where he ran a lot. He had years where he hit for more power. He had years where he hit for high average. He had years where he didn't. And he finally kind of put that all together in his year at Florida. And the other thing that was valuable about him is that he is that guy who I think at South Florida he played 7 different positions in his
Hmm.
time there, and so he really was the guy where it was like whatever injury was happening, you could just use Bobby Boster to plug the hole
Yeah.
for the time being, and so just super valuable. I think he was more impactful offensively. I thought he was going to be a nice player, but he was more impactful offensively than I thought he would be. And then when you add in the defensive versatility piece, I think you just have like a really valuable guy that probably maybe it was just because Florida was struggled the way they did, but um, at times anyway. But for whatever reason, he just never was the front of mind guy for the Gators, even when things were going well.
Yeah. Great call. That was something is was kind of preparing for this, just looking through some of the other teams too, and for him to what he hit 18 home runs too. I
18,
mean, he
yeah,
hit for power. I mean, positional versatility. Played shortstop when Shelton got hurt, and
yeah,
just being able to do that and really, I mean, they had stretches no Shelton, no Heyman, and Boser was really the guy, right?
yeah,
And if you'd have told us that in the offseason, you're like, but man, Florida's in trouble. And
yeah,
if anything, they played better down the stretch. You know, they were able to have some success. So yeah, great call. Not someone on our big transfer portal radar.
yeah,
Heading into the year, but boy, he ended up being as impactful as most that you can mention out there.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the list is short. But maybe
Mm-hmm.
Andrew Fisher,
A
Liam
few,
Doyle, that
yeah.
group of guys. But other than that, like
Heinsohn, yeah.
yeah, like
It's
other
short.
than that, he's right there. Yeah, yeah. All right, Mark, we're halfway through. Let's keep plugging along. What you got next?
Yeah, let's go Auburn. I think the obvious thing is, they weren't that good last year, and boy, did they turn it on, and just a really great season for them. A lot of times teams that have something to prove, they'll get off to a good start, and then they get to conference play, and the wheels kind of come off. And that was not the case with Auburn as they figured it out. Meanwhile, they had a bunch of freshmen who just burst on the scene, and if anything, they got better as the year went on, as freshmen did, and that was a big part of their success. The underline, the I guess the undervalued story here is Sam Dutton, the LSU cast off, who had opportunities there, but it just never really clicked, and not as talented as the traditional LSU pitchers. Certainly, he's not going to light up the radar gun like those guys. Although his stuff is good, his velocity is not. Um, and for him to come in and be the everyday Friday guy, start 16 games, just be able to have that consistency, that durability, set the tone, and match up with some of the best pitchers in the country. That to me was huge for them because remember how bad their pitching was. The prior year to grab this transfer again, not a guy we were really expecting a ton from when this time of year last year when these uh, portal decisions are made. And man, he was great. He was one of the better stories. You love to hear about. We all rail about the portal at times. Okay, you don't know who's on what team from year to year, but it is great when a guy who it just wasn't going well. You didn't see a path for him to be an everyday guy. Gets a change of scenery, and for whatever reason, it clicks. And that's the untold story of the portal. That that's why it's hard for me to say, oh, that you should stamp out all these transfers. And I get it from a fan's perspective. You like to have a chance to develop your players all the way through. But in situations like this worked out really well for a pitcher who had a small role and turned into, arguably one of the better Friday guys in the whole conference.
Yeah, that's such a good call on that being the kind of shiny example of what the transfer portal could be. Because even Jay Johnson, I don't think really could have any sort of gripe there. And I don't think he'd mind me saying this, especially now that the season's over. Like I remember him saying it at one point, like, we didn't want to lose him.
Right,
But our rotation has been what it's been. It's been a hard rotation to crack. And oh, by the way, there was no guarantee he was going to be in the rotation last year either,
right,
because we found out who he really was because Auburn had the opportunities at LSU, especially when Shores was in the rotation. Dutton might not have gotten those opportunities, and we never would have known what he was capable of. So,
yeah.
yeah, just it's such a good example of just how that's the portal working kind of in an ideal world how it would.
Hmm.
For Oklahoma, good first year in the league, ups and downs, but I think that's to be expected for a team that was doing a decent bit of rebuilding, frankly, coming off of a Big 12 title team the year prior. The Witherspoon brothers were such a big part of it. That's kind of the big headline there. But under the radar was a bullpen guy in Reed Hensley, and that might not be a name that a lot of folks know that aren't Oklahoma fans and supporters. That's not a name that many folks might know, but um, here are his numbers because he was quietly awesome. So here's the overall numbers. So in 33 and 2/3 innings, he had a 2.94 ERA and a 2.05 opponent batting average. Now that's pretty good. But here are his numbers in SEC play: a 1.23 ERA and a 1.04 opponent's batting average in 14 and 2/3 innings. Now you might nitpick and say, okay, well that's not a huge number of innings. It's about the same number of innings as Dylan Crooks. And Dylan Crooks, I don't think anybody would hold that against him
Yeah.
in that case because of his specific role. But Reed Hensley was just awesome. He gave up 5 hits in 14 and 2/3 innings as part of that Oklahoma bullpen that actually turned out to be, the core of it at least. I mean, everybody could use more depth on the pitching staff, but the core of it actually turned out to be pretty good, and be an asset for them. So when the rotation was clicking, and obviously Kyson was clicking all year, and Malachi came on late, and Crossland, it was up and down, but when that rotation was going well, you combined it with that bullpen, and run prevention was a real effective thing for the Sooners in their first year in the SEC.
Yeah, it's a lot of times the closers get a lot of pub, or you have the guy, the wind vulture, who gets a lot of pub, but you don't really get a lot of quote stoppers, or somebody who comes in a situation to really bridge it. Those guys are so valuable, but they're often overlooked. So yeah, I'm with you, man. I understand the value of that role, and he played it really well. And as I look back on Oklahoma's season, that was a team that we really didn't know what to expect from them as they entered the SEC. We felt like they would pitch pretty well from a starting role because they had such talented frontline guys, but we didn't know what the bullpen would look like. And certainly Crooks stepped up, and so did Hensley. So that's as you look back on the 2025 Oklahoma season, I do feel the bullpen is one of the shining moments
Yeah,
that's going to last from this season.
yeah. All right, next up for you, Mark.
Let's go to Alabama. So obviously Justin LeBron, incredible talent, got off to this incredible start and didn't hold it, but Certainly bodes well for next year as he goes through and works on laying off the slider. I do feel like if uh, Alabama did make another regional team, I feel like they were stair step better than the prior season, even though they had a similar regional result. Although they played a lot better, they just lost 2 close games. Um, and part of that, and maybe the overlooked piece, is they went undefeated in midweek.
Mm.
They only lost one non-conference game. Um, they beat Coastal Carolina, they beat Southern Miss, they beat Troy twice, they beat NC State. They went through, and I feel like that was a big reason why they were in the mix. Their RPI was good. They were in the mix to host,
Yep.
going into last weekend. And if they win that series against Florida or Vanderbilt, perhaps they really needed one more win, and maybe they're in one of those last host spots. And who knows? You get to play at home. Your season might be a little different for the postseason. So I feel like that was a because to win that many to not lose in that many opportunities against an okay non-conference schedule, you've got to be you got to be consistent, and you got to continue to work forward. And I feel like they've been able to keep focused on the game at hand and not look ahead to what's to the weekend, because you see it every year. SEC teams, AC, really the top teams, they get caught and lose to someone they shouldn't, and Alabama, they were able to avoid that all year, and that's a testament to that coaching staff keeping their eyes on the prize.
And it's one of the things that the critics of the SEC will hammer the idea, and we won't dive into this specifically. I'm making a larger point, but just that the critics are like, oh well, the SEC's RPIs are inflated because all they do is play each other, and they all have high RPIs, and it's just kind of this like circular
Mm-hmm.
thing. Well, the the thing about that is one of the reasons why the RPIs are good, or even if you want to use the word inflated, I don't agree,
Mm-hmm.
but okay, is because they just don't. The league, for the most part, a couple of exceptions, the league for the most part does not lose games it shouldn't lose out of the league.
Mm-hmm.
Like Alabama, they might be alone in having not lost a midweek game and not lost many non-conference games, but they're not alone in terms of having an extremely good non-conference record in the league. And
Right.
even some teams that were just kind of like in the SEC just ran through their non-conference, and that's the difference when you start to talk about comparing the SEC to others. And we could sit here all day and kind of nitpick individual schedules, compare, like that's not
Yeah.
really the point here. The point is just that you know the RPI, they get the benefit of all those good RPIs and then playing each other in the league because they just don't drop games they shouldn't the rest of the season. And when you start to look at some other teams in other leagues, it's not true all necessarily all across the board, but a lot of them, teams that you think are good and their RPI isn't where you think it should be based on how good they are. You look at the schedule and it's like, okay, well, yeah, they lost a game the second weekend of the year to a team that has an RPI of 240 now, and then they
Mm-hmm.
lost a midweek game to this team with an RPI of 185, and then they just that compounds, and
Yeah.
and that's how it happens.
Yeah.
I've got Kentucky next. Um,
Okay.
Obviously, the third straight regional, similar to Alabama, where it's like we shouldn't overlook how important that is for a baseball program that uh, Kentucky, more so than Alabama, just has gone through stretches where that was never seemed possible.
Mm-hmm.
John Cohen didn't do that at Kentucky. Gary Henderson didn't do it at Kentucky. Like this Kentucky program right now is it's the first time that's ever happened.
Yeah.
And so that's big. Tyler Bell breaking out onto the scene was a big deal. But my overlooked thing is Ethan Walker's role on the mound as a swing guy. It felt like he became a little bit, as the season went on, of their secret weapon. Where when they had a TBA on the weekend, like he was in consideration for it, but they also liked the idea of using him as a like a high leverage guy out of the bullpen.
Or the first guy out. Yeah.
Right, or the guy the guy that comes out and they look for him to give you four, that
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. And he could just do all of it, and it wasn't dominant stuff. It wasn't you know blow your doors off. But it was a 4.08 ERA. in 46 and a third innings, and on a Kentucky pitching staff that ultimately that was the reason they didn't advance further. Frankly, is just they just didn't have enough pitching behind Ben Cleaver and Nick McKay and those guys. But Ethan Walker was part of the solution, and he's the other guy, a little like Luke Harrison, where could he get drafted? Yeah, Ethan Walker's stuff is pretty good, but could he also come back and just be a major part of things for Kentucky in 2026? Absolutely. And I think that's true of a lot of guys on this Kentucky roster, which I think is actually going to kind of be sneaky really good going into next season. Because don't look now, like their young players didn't get the attention of Auburn's young players, nor should they have. Auburn's freshman class was on another level, but they kind of sneakily do have a lot of young pieces that are going to be back on that team next season. So I'm looking forward to that. And Ethan Walker is one of those pieces where he's not going to get a lot of attention when the draft comes up, but if he doesn't get selected and he doesn't just sign as a non-drafted guy and wants to come back, like that could be kind of a quiet, huge addition to have him back on the roster moving forward.
Yeah, I agree with you on Kentucky. Depending on how the draft goes, and we have time to talk about this later, but that could be a really good roster. That could be a team that's because we just picked our E for Omaha, and they could, when we pick this again, say in fall, they could actually be in that mix, and that's a testament to what that staff continues to do. They've been able to reload, and I feel like, with Walker specifically, portal guy comes in, you don't really know what to expect, but buys in. Understands his role or roles in this case, and is able to excel. And I feel like that's what Kentucky has been able to do, is they've been able to get their kind of guys who come in and maybe, they certainly have some draft guys, but they don't require a top elite, top 10 round guy to be successful. And certainly he's a great example of that. And should he come back and continue to improve, and now he's got a year of SEC experience under his belt, you don't really know what he can be next year, right? You just, I feel like those are the kinds of stories that I know you love to tell, and it's the underdog who gets the opportunity and is able to crash through the wall and become one of the better, become a key cog for his team. And Ethan Walker, because he was able to pitch in so many different roles and do it successfully, because he had some key starts as well. He's just a guy who could beat you a lot of different ways if you're in your other dugout, and those are the guys you hate to play against, but you love them when they're on your side.
And relatedly, one last thing on Kentucky is that one critique that we hear, we being D1 baseball, hears from Kentucky folks is, why don't we get the benefit of the doubt that some of the other SEC teams do when it comes to preseason rankings and stuff like that? And my answer typically is, well, because the rankings, preseason rankings, tend to be a trailing indicator as opposed to a leading indicator.
Yeah.
Right. So
good call.
That it takes some time, but then also the history of Kentucky baseball was you have a good year and then you fall back to the pack, and it takes 2 or 3 years to kind of spin back up and get back in that position. Well, this is now 3 years in a row where the floor has been really high. Obviously, ceiling was too in 2024. So if this roster continues to hold through the draft, this is when maybe the benefit of the doubt for Kentucky starts to come into play, because you're now talking 3 straight postseasons. You're starting to get guys like a Tyler Bell. They've got a couple, shout out to Derek Terry and his Batcat Central newsletter. He's covering their guys that are in the draft, and they've got a couple guys not quite as highly regarded as Tyler Bell, but in that same conversation that could be in Lexington instead of signing. And if any of that comes to pass, like I said, that's when, okay, now we're starting to see Kentucky a little bit differently when we start to talk about preseason prognostication. So went long there, but I feel like they're just such an interesting team moving forward with what they bring back.
Yeah,
so,
Mark,
maybe
that's another offseason. Yeah, maybe that's another off-season topic is all the things
Yeah,
that play into, preseason prognostications,
yeah,
if I could speak. Yeah, those are
yeah,
those are really interesting things because I agree, Kentucky often gets the short shift there, but for
yep,
reasons you described and a few others that we could get into.
yep,
So next up for me is Mississippi State. Obviously, the in-season coaching change that stole all of the air out of the room. Then I guess the other thing is, Ace Reese just explodes. One of the better seasons of anybody. Um, Came in from Houston relatively unheralded. Certainly, he had a great fall and he was on our radar, and we expected big things, but I don't think we expected this. And he became one of the better hitters in the conference. I think where I'm going to go here is Noah Sullivan to be a two-way player in the SEC and to do it well. Um, that's got my attention. And he was a quality midweek starter for them after they kind of went through some guys and didn't really get what they wanted out of a few, and then he ended up taking that role and running with it. Meanwhile, he's hitting in the middle of the lineup, hitting double-digit home runs and RBI guy and giving lineup protection to whoever's in front of him. Sometimes it's Reese. I feel like when you're able to come in, and we didn't know what he would do. He's jumping up from, is it upstate that he was at, and he's able to flourish at the next level. And we all see. You're going to look at it now. Go look at the transfer tracker, and you're going to see guys from lower level jump into higher level. And if you go back and look at last year's, and then see how many of them flourished and how many of them didn't, and you're going to see a whole lot that didn't, because it's really challenging to make that leap to the highest level in the sport. And he was able to do that. And I feel like, to be able to not just do it as a pitcher and not just do it as a hitter, but to be able to do both, you're getting two players. And in this new world where we're going to have rosters capped, those two-way players, maybe that'll become more in vogue now. You see more of that, and he's I guess an example of someone who's done it well. And when you do it well, I mean, we all loved watching Cags for 3 years. Noah's not Cags, but he certainly, he held his own and had a good year as a two-way guy.
yeah. And I have to admit, offensively, I saw him at Upstate. I mean, that's an easy
Mm-hmm.
drive for me, so I typically end up there at least once a year, just dropping in on him. And
Right.
a very good player at Upstate. Dealt with a lot of injuries. That was part of it. But I kind of thought that he struck me as a guy. It's like I just don't know if that's going to translate.
Mm-hmm.
The pitching in the Big South, and I truly don't mean to be disrespectful, but the pitching in the Big South is not very good once you get past the very top of it. And so, and Upstate plays in a hitter's park. So I just thought, I have a bad feeling that he's going to get exposed a little bit, and I was very
Mm-hmm.
wrong about that,
Yeah.
and obviously you're happy for the kid. Like I'm happy for his sake to be wrong, because that's got to be a cool deal where you take a bet on yourself, that you can get it done in the SEC, and you know, I, he's at least put himself in position to have a pro career.
Right.
Just because he was, we'll see what happens after that, and obviously he's an older guy, so it's not like he's going to get 8 figures of bonus money thrown at him, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But he's going to have an opportunity that he might not have had he not proven it in the SEC. So that's huge. Um, let's go to South Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to talk a little bit about Nathan Hall, who was a guy for me when he was at Clemson. Who there were a couple falls in a row where I saw Clemson, and you watch Nathan Hall play, and you're like, okay, he looks like a pro, like physically, body
Mm-hmm.
wise, he
Oh
looks like a
yeah.
pro.
You want
Like
him
he
getting off the
runs.
bus first. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like he runs.
Yeah.
He plays good. He plays good outfield. He's strong. Like his BP is impressive. And then it's like, why is this not working? And I
Mm-hmm.
get that baseball's hard. It's not that simple, you know. Um, if it were just about who has a who's physically fit and has a good swing, like there'd be a lot more great players. But it's not that simple. But he did put it together at South Carolina and was a rare bright spot in what was otherwise a really, really tough season for the Gamecocks. Big season coming up for those guys. We'll, I'm sure, touch on that a lot this offseason. But he was kind of a bright spot. And again, another guy that like scouts liked him because they liked his tools. They just needed to see it. And he's put himself in position where I'm sure he's going to have an opportunity at the next level just based on what he did last season and really did a nice job kind of to the extent that they did stay afloat. I guess they didn't really, but to the extent they did, he was often the guy that was, he and Ethan Petrie were often the guys that were doing it.
Yeah, super talented guy. When you have that sort of upside, and we've all seen the guy who teases us for 4 years, 5 years, and then never really puts it together. And this is another example where a guy gets a change of scenery, gets an opportunity to play every day, and it works. And for him, it's going to parlay into an early draft choice, and he's going to have a chance to make money playing this game. So I feel like when you have a player like that, it seems like those kinds of players always get opportunity A and B and C and D because you're never going to give up on that elite level aptitude. But I love when this finally pays off, because we all hate the idea of the guy who was just uber talented, and then he's Uncle Rico 30 years later talking about how if he'd have just got the opportunity. And he's in this case with Hall, he's been able to avoid Uncle Rico because he was really good this year, and he's going to get a chance to be the next guy, be a high choice anyway, and be on a fast track if he can continue to reach into that enormous talent.
All right, Mark, your final team in what used to be the SEC West. Go ahead.
Yeah. Little program down from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of them. Yeah. LSU, they won it all. Had a great postseason run, had great rotation. Cade Anderson, Anthony Ianson, Derek Curiel, one of the best freshmen in the country. But the guy I'm going to talk about is Ethan Fry. Ethan Fry is a player that, as a freshman on their title team, had a few opportunities, and he was a guy Jay always talked about. I mean, Fry's going to be good, and he just couldn't. That team was stacked, and there just wasn't enough time. And then last year, he got a few opportunities, got injured, just didn't really work out. And then this past season, 25, man, I mean, he got thrust into the lineup, and when he got opportunities, he delivered. I mean, he's this big hulking dude. He's a high school quarterback. He's like, I don't know, 6'5", and he's a big, tall guy, big, thick, 230 pounds. I mean, he looks the part, and the ball jumps off his bat. I mean, it's I mean, it's like with Jared Jones, right? When those kind of guys impact the ball. And he was similar in that regard, and was able to, I mean, hit 331, 15 doubles, 13 homers, just had a big year, hit in the middle of the lineup, ended up hitting third by the end of the year. Just a player who, another, you want him getting off the bus. He and Jared Jones, I mean, they look the part. That's what you're looking for with these big physical sluggers, and that's what Fry was able to do in a year, and I would assume he's going to be a good draft. I mean, he certainly looks the part. And while he was a DH at LSU, I mean, I think he's a good enough athlete. He can play the outfield, assuming he's healthy. So I think there's a bright future for him, and he's a guy. He got 2 rings in 3 years, and not a lot of people can walk around. I mean, his fingers are a whole lot heavier leaving LSU than they were when he got there 3 years ago.
Yeah, Jay Johnson has long been an Ethan Fry truther, if you will.
Yeah.
He has said that he thought Ethan Fry was going to be an All-American, and while he didn't quite get there, he got pretty doggone close. So it's just another credit to one of the things that program is doing really well. It's, I think they in Tennessee are almost on a different level right now in terms of, their portal additions. They have an incredible hit rate on the portal.
Right.
They're still getting those blue chip guys like Derek Curiel,
Yeah.
and they're still developing well. They still have program guys that get
Hmm.
better as the years go by.
And credit to Ethan. I mean, a lot of guys that don't get the opportunity, have people, really talented players in front of you. You hit the road and you go somewhere where you can swing it every day. And he didn't do that. Stayed the course and believed in himself, bet on himself, and boy did it pay off this year.
No doubt about that. I think there's something poetic about the fact that your last team was LSU and my last team is Missouri.
Hmm.
Um, just as a
Yeah,
bookend, I guess, to the
yeah.
season and the discussion.
Those things are not the
Um,
same. Yeah.
no, they were not. I will say first with Missouri, we've probably talked about it here, but I was when they were eliminated in Hoover. Kerry Jackson just has an impressive presence about him, just in general. Um, and sometimes that can fool you into like buying into what a person is saying. And I'm not saying I don't with Carrick. I'm saying the opposite, where even beyond the presence, like I thought it was really impressive his ability to just be open and honest with without throwing anybody like players and whatnot under the bus. Like we just weren't good enough. And
Yeah.
specifically, we got to get better on the mound. And you might say, oh well, what is he supposed to say? They went 3-27 in the league, and fair, okay, but there are a lot of coaches that still wouldn't do that. They would just kind of be a lot more vague about it. They would just say, hey, we're gonna stay the course, and we're still believing what we're doing here. And but Carrick was a lot more was stronger than that. Was a lot more definitive than that. As they were leaving Hoover, and like we're this was not acceptable, and we're going to get better moving forward, and it's going to be a great story when we do, and we'll see if they do or not. They have to prove that to us, but so that was impressive to me. But the overlooked thing is just how good. I mean, he was their best player, so maybe this is a little bit of a cop out, but just how good Jackson Lovich was.
Hmm.
It's really hard when you are clearly the most dangerous hitter in the lineup to thrive the way he did. He batted 357 this season, 337 in SEC play. And when you're kind of the one guy that everybody has to pitch around, that's a hard way to live because
Hmm.
you're not getting really anything to hit. You're having to wait for mistakes or be willing to take your walks, and Lovich did some of both. So just impressive that he was able to thrive that way, and also his willingness. Look, after the 24 season, I'm sure he had options,
Oh yeah.
and he, especially given, I think a lot of people frankly assumed he'd be at Arkansas, just given that's where Ross was, and their younger brother was a Arkansas recruit. Like I think there was some assumption that he was just going to end up there, and he didn't. He stuck it out, and I think while that could not have been a fun season to endure,
Right.
he himself really proved some things, and so kudos to him for sticking it out and then making the best of it in what was otherwise, I'm sure, not a fun thing to have to experience.
Yeah. It's got to be tough when you're going out, especially in conference games, and no one expects you to win other than the guys in your dugout, and you hope that they do, right? Because
Right.
you know maybe you're wondering if you should, right? Because based on how the year's
Right.
gone, and to go out and put that aside and to still have the year that he did, that shows a lot of character, shows a lot of mental toughness, and I do feel like that's something. Those are traits that are going to serve him well in pro ball or in life or whatever, right? Because he's been through something hard and been able to thrive in the midst of all that nastiness. So it's going to be fascinating to see what Missouri looks like next year. Haven't really hit the portal that hard. They've got a few, and it'll be fascinating to see. Got some guys coming back who took some lumps, and you anticipate them being better, and then more incoming, freshmen and junior college players to try to improve the talent level. So again, that'll be fascinating, but they won't have Jackson Lovich to be in the middle of the lineup. He'll be in pro ball, so there's an opportunity for for several people to step forward and try to elevate Missouri from, the worst team of our SEC baseball memory to whatever's next. And, most likely it won't get any worse. So the question is, how much improvement can you make, and is that enough to give you hope that Carrick has the plan to get them to where they want to be?
Yeah, it will be fascinating. I like some of the individual portal guys they brought in. I like Drew Dickinson as the pitching coach hire. So I do think there are some reasons for modest optimism, but again, it's just the climb up in this league is so tough. And oh, by the way, you probably can't bank on there being another team that was historically bad in the league in South Carolina.
Yeah.
That kind of helps maybe.
Yeah, they're going to be better. Yeah.
Right. So it's just like, you could just, if it goes bad again, you could just be really left behind in a way that you weren't necessarily. But I suspect, again, to your point, I suspect Missouri will be better. It's just a matter of how much, and does it make a material difference in terms of whether or not they're playing meaningful baseball games other than the conference tournament in May. So that's going to be the ultimate question. All right, Mark, this was a fun exercise. Always fun to go back and revisit it a little bit as we start to look forward. Moving forward, we've got some cool stuff on deck for the podcast this offseason. We're still going to go mostly weekly. We do take the occasional week off here and there, just based on various travel schedules for me or for Mark, and family stuff and what have you. But most weeks we're back with an episode, and we'll talk some summer ball, we'll talk draft, we'll talk fall ball when we get there. And we'll help you get through a long off season. We do our best anyway. We'll have plenty of guests. That's something we'll probably do a lot more of this off season than we have in the past. So we will have all of that as well. So that is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. I want to thank Academy Sports and Outdoors for sponsoring this and every episode of Highway to Hoover. I want to thank Mark, as always, for joining me, and thank you, the listener, for listening. We'll talk to y'all soon.